I talked to a lot of people who run large experimentation programs, but not all of them grew those programs from the ground up. And even fewer people have repeatedly started experimentation programs from scratch at multiple companies. But for Lucia van der Brink, that's kind of all she does. Lucia and her team at the Initial run a very unique type of experimentation services agency. They work with companies for about a year to start experimentation programs, but at the end of that year, the goal is to send them on their way, having built internal self-sufficient capabilities to run and grow experimentation programs. So I figured she would have some particularly unique insights on what exactly those core capabilities are, what you need to do to get an experimentation program off the ground and set it on a long-term trajectory for success. I'm Ryan Lucht, and that's today's episode of Outperform. All right, Lucia, so you worked in experimentation for a number of years and worked as an agency partner to companies for a number of years. And then it seems like sometime in the last year or two, you sort of had this epiphany that maybe the way that relationship between external support and, experimentation programs that we're trying to build inside of companies wasn't working the way that it ought to, or not leading to the long-term outcomes that it ought to. So I'm very curious about your sort of thesis statement with the Initial, which is that experimentation needs to be owned. It shouldn't be rented. But can you maybe walk us through the journey of coming to that realization as someone who's, been on both sides of that relationship in the past?
Yeah, 100%. I'm in experimentation and CRO now for more than 10 years. And I guess it all started when I was just working in-house myself. And we there hired an agency. And that agency was led by Ton Wesseling, which is also a known name in the space, of course. And I kind of got to learn firsthand from him and Bart Schultz at the time and the team there what CRO was supposed to look like. And while at first, when you start, you think it's about finding wins and making money for the company and growing, and it is all these things, over time, I've come to appreciate different aspects of experimentation and CRO much more. Such as that it really empowers people. It gives people an autonomy to figure things out for themselves, especially in larger corporations. So sometimes in larger corporations, it can be very top-down structure. You're just, one bee in the hive working, but then you have so many managers above you. And well, that's always how I experienced it, as all these people are telling me what to do and how to do it. But with experimentation, you can actually have the tools and the data to figure all these things out for yourself. So I think that's very empowering. And I think that changes something in power dynamics as well. And I think in a healthy company, it should be possible for someone in a call center or an intern to come with a great idea based on what they have seen and based on their experience and based on their expertise. And I think experimentation helps people like them grow the company, because they might have a great idea that grows the company or that is a winning A/B test. And I really, really appreciate that. So when I say experimentation should be owned, not rented, I think about the culture really that it creates. And it's a data-driven culture, and you want to learn. It's not about opinions. It's not about who is the highest manager that's going to decide things. But I think it shifts something in culture that I find very interesting. So especially when I think about the type of clients that we like to help at the Initial, they're usually companies that do more than 100 million a year. So, really usually international, multinationals, bigger companies. And especially there, I think it's very important to, play around with those power dynamics, because sure, it might work top down, but what if experimentation helps us to have individuals and teams actually figure things out by themselves and autonomous, and what works for them, what works for their pages, etc., etc. And then I think as a company, you want to be supportive of that. You want people to trust people to do their best work with all the knowledge and expertise that they have, because that's what you hire them for. So you want to give people that space, and that's unfortunately not always what happens in real life. So we hire extremely smart people, but we still tell them exactly what to do and how to do it. That's sometimes, something that happens in companies. But next to that, next to deciding like, hey, we want to build this kind of culture and we want to grow our company by being this type of organization, there is also the piece of, it's just really smart to have this competitive advantage inside your company, right? Instead of like having it be owned by external resources. But I understand, of course, that sometimes that's how things start. But I do believe if you really work together with a great CRO agency, they don't just find winning A/B tests for you, but they actually show you the process. They show you and teach you the way of prioritization, how to work data-driven, how to QA a test, simple things like that, how to look at data and analyze results. And then hopefully eventually they leave you with that capability inside the company, so that then when they leave, they have not only found you winning A/B tests, but they have also built this part of your company and maybe people in your teams that now can understand for themselves where to start with which changes, how to run an experiment to validate what works and what doesn't, and also how to look at data. Is a 0.5% lift really interesting on our data set? Yes or no? That's very difficult for people to determine that. But if you know the answer, that can help a lot.
Yeah, I love these. There's a couple words that you used a few different times between autonomy and self-sufficiency. And I love this message because, experimentation only goes so far if there's only one or two teams doing it. Like really, you only reach like the true potential of experimentation when it's very accessible to many people in an organization. And I know personally that it's hard for an external partner to do that democratization, right? You kind of need someone on the inside who's going to bat for experimentation and maybe expending some career or relationship capital in the tough moments, and making this push for culture. I have a couple follow-up questions, but maybe we can start with what the outcomes are that you're looking for. Like what makes a client engagement successful for you? Like when you're handing things off, what makes you feel optimistic that this experimentation program is going to continue to go great places even after, you're done working with a company?
Yeah, so I would say in the beginning, it's CRO and experimentation is usually brought in from a growth from a growth perspective or a product perspective. But the goal is to find winners and grow the brand, do more conversions. That's usually how things start. So that's also usually where you need to start. And after a while, you prove again and again how valuable experimentation is, not just for the growth or the money it brings in, but also, as a way to have designers figure out with which design to go, or have someone in the C-suite figure out that the color they want for the brand actually sucks conversion-wise, those kind of things. So eventually people start to understand the bigger potential of experimentation. But you need to build that, and it really depends on the organization how you do that. So sometimes there are multiple teams testing, and then you have one team taking it on very well, while another team, is just stuck. So then what you can do is you can focus on that team that is doing very well with experimentation and kind of champion that within the organization, and, make them an example for the rest of the organization, and kind of try to put them on a pedestal or at least, show their work in the organization. And then often what happens, because that team is successful and they can show wins and they can show what they learned, that will kind of trickle down in the organization. But we also sometimes have clients, like we have also one client now that is they just have no idea about the internet still. So when they think of experimentation, what they suggest is like, yeah, we're going to write a lot of content on our product landing page to help people decide. And then we're like, yeah, but maybe people can decide easier if you just introduce a filter, not like a bunch of text. So for them, it's a very different growth trajectory than for an organization that already has multiple teams. So it really, really depends what we find and, which levers to pull in that sense. But at least I gave two very opposite examples of, what things can look like.
Yeah. I'm curious about like the actual types of projects or work that you take on in these containers, because like you said, when experimentation or CRO is being introduced for the first time, especially towards a growth goal, it is that sort of mindset. Okay, we're looking for some wins,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe the natural predilection is to look for an agency partner or vendor, whoever, who's going to deliver X number of tests, or even worse, X number of wins or something, right?
Yeah.
And I've been a part of these agency engagements where the actual work can really run the gamut. Like sometimes it is just sort of outsourced engineering support for marketing teams who don't have the ability to write code. Sometimes it is about like really doing a lot of training and training trainers. And I used to joke that like half of my job was teaching stats 101 to marketers. But when you talk about the capabilities that you're trying to help clients build, I'm struck that they seem like very difficult problems to work on from the outside, right? Culture building and finding champions and helping put them on a pedestal and talking to the C-suite. What are you finding most effective in working with clients on those sorts of challenges?
I don't think there is one answer. Like the scope and the difference in companies is sometimes it's so crazy. And it's also, I don't know, I do feel it's kind of magic to work with these companies every time and find something completely different. So we also have one brand that we work with, and their traffic comes fully from meta ads. And they want their meta ads to fit the funnel. So what did they do? They just launch a new funnel for every successful ad. So then you get like, I don't know, like a crazy amount of funnels. And then, how do you solve that? How do you work with that? And I think it's, there is always a different challenge in every company. The challenge is different. So this kind of the answer you don't want to hear is it depends. But I would say what we do like to do is like first quarter, we'll get you the wins. And then we want to prove to the larger organization, like, hey, we are now using these resources. Can we do more? How can we like bring this culture into the organization? But I have to say, like the heartbeat is always just running experiments, just running experiments. And on top of that, you build culture. And on top of that, you try to, talk to managers, C-suite, etc. But it's almost the boring part is always running those A/B tests and helping those A/B tests being run. So we kind of try to shift from done for you, because sure, we have the resources, we'll do it for you. But then eventually we invite team members to also come with test ideas. And how do you prioritize that? And how do we get that into the pipeline? How do you QA it? Do we have dev resources now? Can we ask for more dev resources? Or if not, then we help. And we try to figure that out as we go so that eventually it's not anymore done for you, a done for you program, but it's a done with you program. And I think that is the actual true value in there. And it's much more valuable than just winning a B test, but not everyone realizes that.
I've always observed, and you can tell me if this has been true in your experience too, that like you can tell all the stories you want about A/B tests that happened at some other company, right? Oh, this company didn't A/B test their redesign, things went really poorly, then they tested it and found that there were these three problems, or that infamous engineer at Microsoft who decided to see what would happen if he made the ad headlines longer. It was just tinkering in an afternoon and changed a few characters of code and it was billions of dollars in revenue or whatever. You can tell those stories all you want, but they really don't land in a way that helps build culture or like really gets people to believe in experimentation until they see those patterns happen inside their own company. Like you have to kind of build the lore from scratch of, oh, here's why we A/B test every bug fix even, or here's why small changes can have outsized impact, etc. So I imagine keeping that heartbeat of experiments going throughout is, really what unlocks everything else. Without that, you're kind of just shuffling paperwork around, but it's not going to make an actual difference.
100%. Yeah.
What are some of the topics or hurdles or milestones that you find you're helping clients with the most? And maybe I'm teeing you up a little bit here to talk about tool selection, because I've seen you talk a lot about that lately. But anything else under this umbrella of like, okay, some slight majority of the engagements we're working on, we're having to help them think about X.
Now I can only think about tool selection. So if I think about tool selection, then usually what happens is, well, especially in experienced companies, they think like, okay, we're going to get a tool and then we're going to run experiments. And as that sounds all very nice and magical, the reality is often very different, because once you have found a tool, then you're actually just begun, like you have just started. And what I have experienced, but it's not with every company again, changes all the time, different people, different companies, is that sometimes before starting to run, people buy fancy shoes first. And then they have the fancy shoes and they never run, So I'd rather start at running as soon as possible, because again, I think the heartbeat is just running experiments, even if they're simple, even if they just sometimes move the needle. But I think that is the actual heartbeat, is building that habit and building that mindset and teaching people that mindset and how to prioritize and how to think about changes without opinions and without power dynamics as well, social dynamics. I mean, they're all there. But we just want to figure out what works for our customers, right? Or for the customers of the company.
I feel like that's a great analogy with the running shoes. And I'm saying this as someone who just bought fancy running shoes like a year or two ago. But if I hadn't been running first, I would have no idea how to like compare the fancy running shoes to each other, like to know how each felt on my feet, like what if it was supporting my like stride and my gait in the right way, or if they were somehow like mismatched to me. I think it's similar, right? If you're not already running experiments, you don't know what teams are going to want to weigh in on the tool. You may not know like what certain technical needs or limitations are, or just like the sort of ergonomics of what kind of vibe your company is looking for from a testing tool. I've seen you offer the advice to like not overthink this at the start. If you're not already running experiments, just choose something that's accessible or make a decision relatively quickly. I'm curious if there's like some backstory to how you came to that recommendation. If you maybe saw some companies who were like overthinking this.
I mean, the biggest point for me is that it doesn't end when you choose a tool. So that's actually what's driving this, because just a lot of companies starting out think like, oh, we're going to get the tool and then that's it. They don't realize like, hey, you need someone to think about A/B tests, to set them up strategically, to build them, to QA them, to set up data, to bring all of that together again in an analysis. And because tool selection, I think it is good to spend some time on it, definitely. But if I'm thinking about companies that are just starting out, then I would just say, please start somewhere. And then, the journey begins. And maybe you will have this tool for a year first, but then you switch. But I'm very afraid that the tool becomes the hurdle, or it becomes like this really big thing. And then we look at it like, oh, the tool, and it's going to solve all of our issues when it never will. So sometimes the focus of companies is so much on the tool. We need to get the right tool. Sometimes they even lose the momentum. Like maybe someone in leadership says, "Hey, this year we want to run, or this quarter we want to run, let's say, 20 experiments." Sure, and then everyone's like, "Yeah, let's do this thing." But then if you get caught up these 3 months with choosing a testing tool, I think that's such a waste because you're missing your heartbeat of doing the actual work and doing the actual experimentation. So those are the things I'm thinking about. On the other hand, I also think, you can make it a very thorough process and talk to everyone that needs to be involved, all the teams, all the people that are going to work with the testing tool. But most of those cases and those situations where it takes a little bit longer and when you want to do this a little bit more thoroughly, those are not the companies that are just starting with experimentation. I think they probably already have like some track record. They have maybe run a marathon already, who knows? And then you do want to spend a little bit more money and a little bit more time on selecting the right shoes. But if you do it the other way around, you can figure it out probably if you buy the fancy shoes first, but sometimes it's harder like that.
Exactly. You can have this very thorough process where you talk to a lot of people in the company and get a lot of opinions, but if those aren't people who have already been running experiments or have run a lot of experiments before, it's like, do they really know what to ask for? And I'll do my like personal soapbox, and maybe this is a slightly controversial one as someone who works at a tool vendor. But I've seen you get pushback on LinkedIn around this perspective from people who have said that like the switching cost of experimentation tools can be quite high. And I don't think the world needs to be that way, right? I think that's maybe a relic of the way that uh, experimentation tools have been built in the past, partially out of necessity, right? Where like everything is proprietary to that tool. Like you have to define your metrics in the tool. You have to install the, tool on your website, whether that's a JavaScript snippet or an SDK for feature flags or whatever. And the sort of future that we've moved towards somewhat collectively as an industry is like far more composable, where like all the major feature flagging tools share a common standard now, open features. So if you want to, swap launch darkly for harness or Datadog or whatever, like there's a standard to do that. Your metrics don't need to be defined in the tool anymore. Maybe they're pulling from your analytics source of truth, or they're pulling from a data warehouse, and that makes it easy to swap in experimentation tools on top. It's a slightly different point than the one you're making, but I just don't think this needs to be as scary or contentious of a topic as it seems to be. And like you mentioned in the past, like sometimes agencies would try to keep ownership of the tool too. Like this is just not the world we need to be in anymore collectively.
Definitely. And I understand when you sign with a tool, it's usually also for a longer period of time. So that can make things more difficult. Sometimes within an organization, just to get an SDK installed or just to get like a script into the header to set up a testing tool can take you a month or a couple of months, which is really sad. And then, if you're a team inside this big, huge company that works very slow and you just want to go fast, then this will be a bottleneck for you, right? And you have to navigate that, and maybe navigating that is never facing it. And I also understand that.
So maybe to kind of close things off, I will lob another open-ended question at you. Sorry, not one that I gave you time to prep for in any way. So whatever you come up with. But similar to this tool selection thing, are there any topics or questions that you think companies either are really overthinking right now and they could, just move faster on to keep up that momentum, or any topics that you think companies are really underthinking and should spend more time being thoughtful about, especially if they are standing up a new experimentation program?
You said one question, but these are two questions, Ryan, but it's okay.
I'm saying you can pick either one to
Oh, I can
answer.
pick either one. Okay. No, that's great.
Or both. You can answer both.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I have a lot of recent experience always to pick from. So I would say something I have encountered recently is that there is also this push for a lot of experiments. Just run as many experiments as possible. And then, I was honestly always in the pro camp, like, yes, let's go velocity, because I do believe in that heartbeat. But then when I want to hear like, okay, there is a company and they are going to hire, for example, external resources for 1 day a week, and that one person has to run 20 to 40 experiments a month, then things go really wrong. So this was another nice misconception that I come across sometimes, and this time again. And sometimes it comes from the meta ads world, where you can just run a lot of creatives in there and test what works. But sometimes there is also in smaller companies like the startup mindset, like, yeah, just go as fast as possible, do as much as possible. But when I hear like, okay, they are looking for a person 1 day in a week to run like this amount of experiments, it's just not going to work. Like, I don't know how this person will do it. Maybe this person can do it, but something's going to go wrong. Like that, they're going to go test live that have bugs, or that just simply don't run, or there is no time to analyze the results. It's just like, oh, we look at the testing tool that determines for us if it's a win, yes or no, but that means you don't learn. So that's an interesting one. I've come across, I think, quite a couple of times actually recently, that there is this push for velocity, but it's kind of an insane push that is like actually unreasonable. But probably if you don't have the experience, you don't really know that is.
Yeah, little mismatch between goals and methods there, maybe.
Mm-hmm. And then you also said something about what are the things we are not thinking enough about. And then I hope people, it can be very simple to run A/B test. But then again, if I look at experimentation and the road and the journey I've taken more than 10 years, then I really think like, hey, it's not just about the wins. It can be so much more. And, I want to help companies build that so much more, because, it helps individuals, teams, and I really believe it also helps companies grow. So that's the mission. Sure, we can start finding you some A/B test wins. I think all CRO specialists and people in CRO experimentation products marketing can do this. We'll enjoy that as well. But there is such a bigger picture behind this, and I think it's truly wonderful.
Yeah, well said, and certainly after my own heart as well. Lucia, obviously folks can and should follow you on LinkedIn. I love your LinkedIn content personally, but where can folks learn more about The Initial?
Ooh, we also have a podcast, so that is fun to watch or listen to. Of course, we have a website, initial.com, and yeah, I'm just posting on LinkedIn about the things we do. So I think those are our main channels. And I would love to meet people that have listened to the podcast or have questions. Just reach out. I'm there.
Yeah, right on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ryan.
Thanks again to Lucia for joining us on today's episode of Outperform and sharing all of those insights and analogies and stories. Hopefully some helpful stuff in there if you're one of these companies trying to get experimentation started from scratch. And if you are building from the ground up, I'm curious, what are some of the blockers or technical challenges or barriers to adoption and buy-in that you're coming across as you're starting off on this journey? Leave a comment below. I'm curious to hear, would love to keep creating content to explore these challenges and hopefully work with you on them. And then keep it locked here on the Datadog Community YouTube channel for more from myself on experimentation and feature flagging, and my colleagues on all sorts of other topics related to modern software development. And until next time, keep experimenting.